Barbara, I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Well, Julie, it's really a pleasure to meet you. One of our favorite things is to talk to new voices, to new authors. Um, Over 31 years, we have a really extraordinary track record, I think, of working with new authors. And your wonderful book, and I see that you have a poster behind you, Waiting for the Night Song. It's our January first mystery book of the month, but due to one thing and another, it's not going to arrive until the end of this week. But it'll still be our January pick. One of the hard things, Julie, about the pandemic is to coordinate the supply side with the promotion side, and we had a little glitch here. Anyway, what have you been doing to promote Waiting for the Night Song?
Well, it's been a learning curve, with I have been working on this book for 13 years and didn't envision launching it this way. But I found that especially, indie bookstores have been the spine of all the debut authors launches, that so many bookstores have offered platforms either for selling them, promoting them online. I've been doing some podcasts. And the other thing is I've been really connecting and coordinating with other debut authors. That's been to me one of the biggest bonuses, if there is any, from the pandemic, that I've connected with other authors and we've been helping each other, promoting each other online, showing up at each other's events, and trying to, be the presence that we can't be in person.
Well, in point of fact, since oftentimes it's difficult for publishers to work out promotional budgets or even do for promoting new authors, this might actually be a better way of going about it if you've created a group effect where you can all be at home, but you can all gather together. I think that's great. What part of the country do you live in?
I divide my time between Boston and New Hampshire. I live in Boston, but I own and operate a small farm in New Hampshire. It's only 2 hours away, so they're not that far apart. But so the farm is in the mountain lakes region up in New Hampshire. And so I spend all my time in there during planting season in the summer. And then during the school year, we're bouncing back and forth.
Well, are you in Boston? Do you teach?
No, I am writing full time at the moment. When it's farm season, I'm there almost full time during the day, and when it's not farm season, I'm writing. I also have 4 kids that are in various, various places of online learning, and so it's a lot of juggling going on, but it's a pretty good mix.
It's hard for me to grasp the scale of New England because the scope, the scale in Arizona is vast. British authors are often surprised when I point out you can drop the entire UK into Arizona with room to spare. I love your part of the country. New Hampshire is perfectly beautiful, and it makes an interesting backdrop, I think, for your book, in which Katie, who has been working out west, is pulled back to New Hampshire. So why don't you tell us who Katie is and why you decided to give her New Hampshire as a location for Waiting for the Night Song?
Yeah, so just like a brief overview of the book. So, Waiting for the Night Song is a dual timeline narrative. It focuses primarily on a central friendship between two women, between Katie and Daniela. And Katie's the main character, and the chapters go back and forth between Katie's viewpoint when she's 11 and when she's 39. And there's a central mystery that's occurring in both of these timelines that come together. But the reason for New Hampshire is, I spend my summers up there, and I have 4 kids, as I mentioned, and we would spend so much time outdoors in the summer, out in the woods. But particularly, we take a canoe out and we go blueberry picking on the lake. And the whole story started with this image of kids in a boat picking blueberries from the water, because I did that with my kids so much. And it's it's a funny story, because we would go out on these big open stretches of lake and pick blueberries from the boat. And at some point my kids started asking me, well, whose blueberries are these? Are we stealing them? This isn't our land. And they were big open stretches of land, no houses, no buildings. So I felt perfectly fine taking some handfuls of berries, but they kept pushing me. And I found myself making up these rules for why it was okay to pick blueberries. And as you know, you've read the book, you know that the kids in my book are stealing blueberries, and they make up this list of rules called the Poacher's Code, which is their rules that they use to justify the fact that they're stealing berries. So after I realized I was not setting a very good example for my kids by trying to justify taking something that didn't belong to us, even though I think it was fine to take a few berries, that idea of this central like false code of ethics that the kids create, that they later use to shield themselves from reporting a crime. And so that central image in New Hampshire on a lake in a boat, little kids, was this image that just stuck with me. And I decided to follow that image, and that's where the book started. Is I did a lot of what if, like what if these kids had this m- made up set of rules, and then what if there was a crime, and they tried to shield themselves from having to report it by leaning on these rules that they made up. And that was how it started. And I was in the woods on the lake, and that was the only place I could have written this story.
Isn't it wonderful how an image can provoke questions? Because really, novels grow out of what if. I think all novels, begin with a what if and then branches out to many, many more what ifs as you move through it. Um, what is Katie's profession? She has a very interesting professional background, and that's part of what brings her back to New Hampshire.
Yeah, so as an adult, Katie's an entomologist, and she's studying a particular invasive beetle called the mountain pine bark beetle, which is a very real beetle. And out west, you guys are probably more aware of it than we are, but it's the same beetle that's been, ravaging forests in California, Colorado, and all over in the West, and even parts of Canada. And it kills pines, leaves the forest ripe for forest fires. And when there's a drought and a fire starts in these forests that have this invasive beetle, you get these really tremendous forest fires that we're seeing in the news. So I used some creative license to move this beetle to New Hampshire by ratcheting up the temperature in New Hampshire and setting the stage that would be inviting for this particular beetle. So Katie is trying to prove the beetle has come to New Hampshire, and no one believes her yet. And she has this obstacle because she is trying to go into federal lands where she knows this beetle has already moved in, but they're cut off from research. The federal lands have been cut off for environmental research. So she has to decide if she's going to risk her career, maybe risk getting arrested to go in and prove that she's right and stop a potential forest fire. So she's a little bit of an activist, a reluctant activist, maybe. She's more of a scientist and a naturalist. She loves the forest. And the reason she's an entomologist, in my first draft, she was a journalist. And I'm a journalist. So for me, when I went to write this story, I made her a journalist because write what you know. I know how to write a journalist. And I was having her covering this beetle. But somewhere along the line, a writing instructor said to me, you have her too far removed from the things she loves. And as a child, in the child's storyline in the book, she is kind of a half feral child living in the woods, climbing trees, building forts, playing in the woods kind of a child. But as an adult, I had written her like one step removed from nature. So she didn't feel like the authentic adult that child would have grown up into. So I moved her closer to the Beatles and made her, instead of writing a story about someone chasing the Beatles, she became the person chasing the Beatles. And then the story felt so much richer and more emotionally complex.
Well, I definitely agree. I think, and also, it's interesting to read about a profession one is not so familiar with. Most of us can work out what journalists do, but entomologists is a little more esoteric. One of the great reasons to read crime fiction, one of the reasons that it's still my favorite genre, although I love biography, I really love romance. I'm hooked on Bridgerton's costumes, although
Absolutely, me too.
I thought there were many, many things lacking in Bridgerton, but the clothes, I mean, it's like costume porn. It reminds me of the Miss Fisher mysteries because S.E. Davis and the Miss Fishers wore these incredible 1920s costumes. So sometimes you can get seduced away by stuff
I
like that.
I completely agree with you. And I feel like in my book, there's not a lot of fashion going on, but I feel like the costumes in my story come from the trees, the nature, the backdrop, the grant, the New Hampshire granite. I feel like that's my it's not costume porn, but setting porn.
Well, landscape in the best crime novels, I think landscape is a character, and it can be an urban landscape. I mean, God knows Boston has, a very high concentration of writers, particularly of crime fiction.
Yeah.
But I began reading Tony Hillerman in real time, and I began reading Robert Parker in real time because I've been doing this forever and I'm old. But you get attached to landscape. I certainly think that the unexpected at the beginning and wild success of Delia Owen's book has more to do with landscape, perhaps, than any other quality in Where the Crawdads Sing. And of course, she too is a naturalist by background.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That book really drew me in from the nature aspects of the how provocative the setting in the marsh was, and this idea of a child living in it was just it made my imagination explode when I was reading that book. I felt like I was watching a movie because she did such a great job. It was so evocative.
Well, she certainly did. The story of the child, of course, the feral child, the sort of unloved child, and how she struggles along. It reminded me, strangely enough, I'm really wandering off point, but what the heck, is that we just finished watching The Queen's Gambit, which is a book I read years ago by Walter Tevis. But if you think about it, Beth Harmon, the lead character in this chess drama, is really not that different than I can't remember the name of the girl in Delia's book. Do you remember what it is?
Kaya, I believe, is
Yeah,
Kaya.
you're right. That's it, Kaya. And Dia, I mean, we did an event for her. She came to the Poison Pen in the August that that book's published. And of course, while I didn't have a complete failure of imagination and that we'd ordered a couple of hundred for our first mystery club, which was larger then than it is at the moment, thanks to COVID. If I'd really been brilliant, I would have ordered like 1,000, but you just can't always get it right. But nonetheless, I do think, that that combination of a potential of a hostile landscape, or at least an unfriendly
Yeah.
landscape environment, and then a child who's at risk, a child who's either not loved or doesn't fit in. And I thought that the orphanage or the home for children and the Queen's Gambit was not remarkably different. And then it took like one adult, to take
Yeah.
an interest in Beth, certainly, and in Delia's book, something else. And so, but you have not a child at risk, at least in the main story, although you've got two stories going on. You've got a scientist who's trying to prove a point, and she makes her at odds with a number of things. So there's still risk. There's
Yeah.
still risk for her, to be there. I wasn't, and just to elucidate for our audience, she's studying this particular beetle back to New Hampshire. Now, is her primary focus the damage that the beetle is doing to the forest, or is her primary focus the idea that if the beetle has damaged the forest, then the risk of fire has exponentially increased?
Well, it's both. They're tied together, and I'm glad you asked that because the beetle. It's an invasive beetle in this area in my book, and when it moves in, what it does is when there's already a drought, these beetles move in and take advantage of the drought, and they burrow in and they cut off the resin flow in the tree, and basically the tree dies of thirst, or it starves off the tree, and then it burns. So it's going to, even if the forest doesn't burn, the beetle kills the trees. So either way, even if there's a fire or no fire. But there's this element of Katie that she's ambitious, career wise. She wants to be right, and she has a little bit of this, in the beginning she's imagining her TED talk she's going to tell one day when she proves she's right, and everybody's, she's this little hero idea in her mind. But she also knows that if a forest fire comes and proves that she's right, it gives her a platform. And so there's this part of her that's almost wanting the fire to come to prove that she's right. But she also, so she's sort of fighting this inside her of knowing she's right and wanting to stop the fire. But if the fire comes, it proves she was right. So she's doing this dance with the fire and the beetle through the whole, she wants to be heard, she wants to be believed, and she wants to stop the fire. But she also has these career ambitions that, so she's at conflict with herself a little bit. But the other thing for me is that there's two points of view in the story in terms of how to handle the beetle. If you remember Piper, who is this younger graduate student scientist who has a different mindset than Katie, and they're having a conversation in the book about whether we should stop the fires or if we should let them burn, because it's like running its natural course. It kills the beetles, and only the strong trees would survive to repopulate the forest into a more resilient forest. And so that is a real conversation that goes on. Should we get ahead of the beetles and thin trees to stop it from burning, or should we let it burn? And so that's an interesting question that the scientists are having in the story.
Well, it's a very important question. Certainly out west, it's been an important question. If you go back and look at the Yellowstone fire, and
Yeah,
then you look at California, part of the problem, of course, not so in your book, but certainly in California, is that too many people have built regular homes or
yeah,
little communities in these areas. And so when you say let it burn, which really would be the natural thing to do, now there are people at risk who have
right.
actually put themselves at risk. And so, it's a big question about whether people, I feel that way about people who do extreme sports. If you have somebody drop you on top of a mountain and you ski down and get caught in an avalanche and you die, um, sure, we feel bad that it happened, but at the same time, that was always a
Yeah.
risk that you took on. And there are plenty of people who are adrenaline
Yeah.
junkies, where that matters. But in terms of people setting up, communities or even just large single or even small, for that matter, single households out in areas beyond regular services, how badly should we feel for them when
Yeah.
they get burned out or flooded out? And I look at Houston, where they have deliberately concreted over the floodplains, and
Right. That's
and
that's
they
a
keep
huge
having,
problem.
they have recurring floods, and yet they just go right back to where it was and keep on building. And where we are here in Arizona, we've made I think, a more significant effort to deal with flash flooding, because I mean, we don't have normal flooding because we don't have major rivers here. But everywhere you go, for example, in Scottsdale, there's allowance for drainage.
Yeah.
In case the water gets away, there are washes and so forth. And I was just reading a fascinating book set in England, in Somerset, which, like Cambridgeshire, has a lot of marsh and major water problems. And the British, over centuries, they dug what they call rines, basically ditches, in order to drain the marshes. But then the rines get choked up with, I'm trying to remember, some kind of weed. I can't remember what it is. And then that makes it sludgy, and then the water doesn't flow, and then it backs up. And, you think about the Dutch constantly
Yeah.
dealing with water. And so if you introduce people living into those kinds of situations, you know,
Well, one of the things when I was writing the book is, we talk about all these things we're trying to head off or stop or prevent when it comes to climate change, or things that are exacerbated by the climate crisis. With the beetles, the instinct is, kill the beetles, stop the beetles, burn the beetles. And at some point in the book, I started realizing, that the beetle isn't the villain. The beetle's just a part of nature that's
yeah,
moving into a hospitable environment. In the same way, people try to do that. We move into places, that we want to move into, and in nature, we're just one part of nature. And I guess is one thing in my book I really, wanted to kind of get across in the book, is we're just one of the many things on this spinning planet. There's the plant, or like in the title of my book, the Waiting for the Night song refers to a little songbird that's becoming endangered in New Hampshire because of climate change. And there's a lot of moving parts in my story of things moving into the region, this invasive beetle and a bird that's becoming endangered, that's actually a result of hurricanes in their winter habitat in the Caribbean. All these little small connections where it just like this big, it's evidence that we can't control as many things as we wish we could control. And it's these teeny tiny creatures, like a little tiny songbird and a very tiny beetle, that they have big impacts on an ecosystem. And whether they, leave our ecosystem or come into it, they change the communities they move into.
well, that's the butterfly wing theory,
Yep.
but it's actually true. And I was thinking back, I grew up north of Chicago in Winnetka, and we had these gorgeous elm trees. I mean, fabulous elm trees. And then Dutch elm disease came
Yeah.
along and
Yep.
decimated that. And I also spent part of my life in the Smoky Mountain region, and I think back to those beautiful chestnut trees, which were decimated by the chestnut disease, whatever. And I give money every year to the repopulation of the more resistant, a new breed of chestnut tree they can. But I remember seeing in France, I think it was, or maybe it was just outside Greenwich Park in London. I think that's where it was, where I saw my first chestnut tree with those candles, those gorgeous
Yeah.
blossoms in bloom. And I thought, oh, I see why, people are so grieving over the loss of these trees, and that perhaps the Smoky Mountains, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about why they're called that. Part of it might have been the chestnut trees, which were huge, created this gorgeous, white kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
canopy. Maybe it was just fog. And then if you go to New Zealand, they actually now at the airport in Auckland, where you have to fly through in order to get into New Zealand, when you can go back anyway, they have a bio security checkpoint.
Oh.
They are ruthless about checking to see if you could have brought in any kind of invasive species. And they have serious programs going on in New Zealand to not only eradicate um, fauna that people have brought and that have proved to be really destructive,
Yeah.
but they are also ripping out the invasive flora.
Yeah,
And
it's
yeah, we were
problematic.
down on the South Island where they had a huge project going to remove all the non-indigenous trees and
Wow.
plants. Yeah, I mean, and they're spending serious money on it. And and I think it's fascinating. I've seen that happen in Australia, where Australia actually took back a whole developed vacation property area in order to protect the wallabies because the
Wow.
domestic pets of the people who would show up, for holidays and so forth, were killing off the wallabies and maybe the little burrowing penguins as well. And I thought, these are governments that are paying more attention and also seem to have more power or at least control, where
Yeah, and public
if
will
you tried to
probably.
do that in the United States, you'd be sued left and right for
Oh,
taking
absolutely.
property. But in Australia, they said, that's it, we're going to save the wallabies, throw
When I
everybody out.
when I was writing Waiting for the Night Song, it was during the same years that I was building my farm. I bought a tract of land that was being that was we had a family home up there, and a property that was really close. It was 100 acres of forest, and we would have bear, moose, deer that would literally walk into our yard. We'd been in the yard with kids and had bears walk into our yard, and these animals came from this land, and when it went on the market for timber and development to just be have the trees torn down, my husband and I took this probably very illogical leap of faith, and we bought the property and developed the land that had already been cleared into a farm. And that's how our farm came to be, because didn't want the moose to be homeless. That's how the whole thing, I was like I accidentally became a farmer, because in order to buy the land I had to have a reason, like a businessy reason to buy it. And so I was like, okay, how about a farm? And I had no idea how to build a farm. And I had to research as I was going, as we were building it. And so I did a lot of, I was doing research. I was out working in the dirt. And I started observing these phenomenon that you're talking about the, changes in the environment, and invasive species coming in, and things that are, threatened in the future. And so as I was writing my book, I was working in the daytime, getting dirty, and had my hands in the dirt and dealing with, all the critters. And then at night I'd come home, and all those ideas just were like filtering through my brain, and they became part of the story. That backdrop of the book is my farm, or the area where my farm is. And at the same time, as I was researching my novel, I discovered things about agriculture and forestry in my region that I didn't know. And I feel like the book and the farm came to be during the same years, and they're really, to me, in my mind, one story. Like, one chapter of my life was writing this book and building this farm, and I don't think either one of them would exist in the form they are right now if not for the other. So I feel like it was all these um, things that, like, for example, in New Hampshire, our growing season has been expanded by 22 days in the last century because of temperature increases, and that's a real number, which worked its way into my story. And I started imagining this slow burning rise of 4 degrees over a century. Like, how would that change a community? Like, what are the small, quiet ways that things change? And that was one of the themes in my book, is how when she goes home 30 years later, the forest is a little bit different, the lake water is a little bit different, the species in the forest are a little bit different, and how that affects a community and an ecosystem.
Well, it does. And you're also underlining Thomas Wolfe, you can't go home again. I mean, you
Yeah,
can't,
exactly.
but the home you thought you were going home to has moved on along with you and is not the same home. Well, I mean, all of that part is wonderful, but in order to make this a crime fiction, you did have to introduce a, um, a death and an investigation. So did you start out with that idea, or did you start out with the story and then the idea of, as you say, of the kids and the code and a murder percolated in? Which way did it go?
Well, that came in very early. Like, initially, it was this very sweet, innocent story of these, kids picking blueberries. But when I created this code, which the kids in the book call the poacher's code, because they think of themselves as poaching blueberries, not stealing them, because it sounds better. So this poacher's code is all these rules that they have to abide by in order to make it okay that they're taking these berries. And so I wanted to push these kids to the limit. Like, how far would you go to uphold like a made up code. And they go to the point of like that, a blood sisters, blood brothers oath, where they, cut their thumbs and put their bloody thumbs together and swear an oath on this code to abide by it forever. Now, after they do that, they witness a crime. And so they shield themselves from the crime by saying, we can't tell because of this poacher's code. So the idea of the code becoming a thing that they use in part to shield themselves from responsibility was what launched the crime part of the story. Is like, what would give 11-year-old girls a reason to not expose something? No, there are definitely other big reasons that they don't tell what they this in this crime that they witnessed. That there's other reasons they don't tell, but they kind of shield themselves ethically and morally with this idea of like, I can't tell, I'm not allowed to tell because I swore an oath to this code. And I think that's kind of reflected in, like police laws. We see a lot of this, I was only doing what I was told, I was following orders, or in the military, or even like religion or a sorority bylaws. You have this list of rules that are benign and good rules. They're there for really good reasons, but sometimes people can use good rules to shield themselves from personal responsibility. So the idea of the crime, um, there was always going to be a traumatic crime in this story because I wanted to push these kids as far as I could, to see how they would respond. Because I think a lot of people have asked me why I reveal the crime in the very beginning of the story when I reveal what happened, because to me, the why is and what happens after the crime are more important than the crime itself. It's what the characters, how the crime affects the characters afterwards, how they rationalize their actions, and how it affects each of them individually. To me, is the fascinating, that to me was the meat of the story, was getting inside everyone's head about why they chose to do what they did and how it affected each of them after.
Stories all have different structures, and this particular story worked this way, but who knows what you might decide to do next, which we'll get to. But how did you link Katie? Because, you can't just have Katie in the forest with the beetles and the fire prediction and then the kids and the crime. How did you create whatever bridges you created?
I mean, between the character of Katie and myself, you mean?
Now, between the character of Katie and then the kids that the
Okay.
poachers. We don't want to give much away here,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So I'll just
you
give
have
some.
two completely isolated plot strains going on in the book. They
Yeah.
have to, they have to come together.
Yeah, so the relationship between the two when they're young, the two little girls, Katie and her best friend Daniela, is very much based on a real friendship I had as a child, with my best friend growing up. And we were those kids that would get up at breakfast and run out of the house, be in the woods. We had built all these forts, and there was a creek in the woods behind us that we used to go jump around in. And we would come home at dinner, and we would just be in the woods, climbing, building. We imagined all these things, and so the dynamics of the friendship was based on a real friendship, not the adult storyline. That's not meant to be that same friendship. But there's a lot of me very much in Katie, especially young Katie, but also adult Katie. I'm very in tune with nature, and I kind of see the world with a naturalist eye. I'm not a naturalist, but I see the world through nature. So there's a lot of me in there. But then the storyline, there's another character, a young boy, um, who is also real. When I would take my kids out kayaking, we used to pass a little boy sitting on the end of his pier almost every day alone, and we would pass by him, and he grew up over all these summers. Like, he's now in his 20s, and I've been observing him sitting on the end of a pier, fishing, reading, plucking on a guitar. And I imagined this whole world for this kid. Like, why was he there? What was he doing? What was he thinking? So he became part of the story because he's kind of real to me. I have no idea who he is. I don't know his name. I don't know his story, but I kind of don't want to, because I want him to live in my imagination the way I think of him. But yeah, these characters, there's a touch of me in both adult and childhood Katie, and then the characters they interact with, a lot of them are based on some real relationships.
Do you plan on giving Katie a second story, or did you see this book as done when it's done?
And I never considered a sequel for the book. This was a one story, and it centered on the girls picking blueberries. That was like the core of the story for me. But as I did all this research, I started following all these entomologists online on Twitter and reading all these articles, and I became obsessed with all these insects out there that are doing these crazy things. And I don't have any plans for a sequel for Katie, but I feel like that maybe it's possible. Like I won't say no, but I don't have any immediate plans. But that this idea of insects um, has really captured my imagination. And actually, the next book I'm writing is also hinges on a specific insect, but not about Katie.
Well, sometimes one story is enough for a character,
Yeah,
and then sometimes other stories occur to people. There's a lot of pressure when you're writing, especially in crime fiction, to create a series. But there are also authors who have very successfully written standalone books, or the series can be tied together with a theme or a landscape, but not necessarily the same characters.
yeah,
So you have a lot of freedom in that, and your publisher Forge, I think, is very good about allowing things to develop. They're not as series oriented perhaps as some other publishers, so that's a very nice fit for you. I really enjoyed this book a lot. I thought I learned a lot from it. I thought the stories were compelling, the characters were, and it was good to learn about a part of the country where I don't live, but Into the Woods I mean, it goes way past the Brothers Grimm, way back in time. And I've been thinking about, how many authors have actually um, the woods. I mean, Tana French's first book,
yeah,
Harlan Coben has certainly done that. I'm trying to remember, there's another book that I've just read that, you know, there's something about in the woods where veneers of civilization can thin or be stripped away, and you're looking more not just at the natural world, but um, you're forced to be more self-reliant if you're
yeah,
going to survive it, or it's easier to become a victim. And occasionally in crime fiction, there's the body found in the woods, and it first looks like it was a bear attack or something, but
yeah,
then um, the autopsy reveals that the bear came along and munched later, and
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
person was already dead, whatever. And so, I do think the woods become a metaphor as well as an actual place for much
Yeah.
of what happens in
Yeah, the
crime
woods
fiction.
are full of mystery. And I think for Katie as a young girl, she sees the woods as full of magic. Not literal magic. It's not a magical realism story, but in terms of just that childhood wonder and awe, she sees possibility and adventure everywhere. She's always imagining things, and she has high hopes for everything. Like every situation could be an adventure to Katie. And I think that the woods amplify that because there's so much sense. I see a lot of awe and wonder every time I walk into a woods still. And so for Katie, the woods are this amazing adventure. As an adult, there's a darkness to the woods, which I also really love about my cover because I love the beautiful colors in my cover, the pink and the purple, but the woods are dark. Which I think feels like just the right cover for my book because there is beauty and wonder in these lakes and forests, but there's a lot to be fearful of in the woods too.
Well, there is. I agree. I think your cover is very distinctive. Those are colors not so often used. And so it does make them stand out. And this is a good point to remind everybody that we still have a few unclaimed autographed copies of Waiting for the Night Song, which is the whole batch is currently in transit to the Poison Pen. It should be in at the end of the week, but you don't want to miss out on this really spectacular debut. So I urge you to grab one while you still can. So it's really been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining me. And I hope we'll do it again. If not, well, I hope we don't have to wait as long as your next book. You never know in this virtual world. And if you decide to get a group of, well, clearly you already have a group of first authors together and you'd like to do some sort of program with us, we'd be happy to.
I would love to talk with you again. This has been a lot of fun, and I'll make a quick plug for the second book. It's called The Last Beekeeper, and it's going to be out a year from now. So you can keep it on your radar. And I would love to come back anytime you're willing to have me. This has been a really fun conversation.
Well, thank you. But I was also thinking, since you mentioned that a number of you debut authors have
Mhm.
gotten together to help each other, that we'd be very happy to, if you wanted to. We did a group on Saturday, the Jungle Red Bloggers. There are 7 of them. And we've done several things together. I've got a group coming together tonight for Mark Graney to talk about action adventure books and
Oh, fun.
thrillers and so forth. So,
I would love
Zoom
to.
Zoom is great that it lets us do that kind of thing, and where travel expenses and so forth would have made it prohibitive
Yeah.
for either the individual author or the publisher. But I think we should take advantage of it. So let me know if you want to organize something, and
You
we'll
can
be
count
glad
me
to.
in. Yeah, look for an
Okay,
email from me. My brain's already spinning with ideas of people I'd love to do a program with. So
that would
that'd
be
be a lot of
wonderful.
fun.
Probably going to need to be maybe towards the end of April, because March is always a wildly busy book here, and it does take a little while to organize it. But
Yeah,
anyway,
definitely.
it would be fun. So a real pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
You bet. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.